I was young, unmarried, and a girl, and yet I was functionally still pastoring people. And they're like, we're uncomfortable, but we still feel God's doing something, but we don't know what to do. But
you're really good. You're better than all these other people. And
I remember like that's when it started. And I'm like going, I'm not trying to prove that I can or should do these things. I'm saying it's happening. So I'm going to put myself in seminary so I'm better equipped for the thing that I am accidentally doing and that you're telling me I can't do, but it is happening.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest. Hey, thanks for joining us for the Upper Left podcast. We are here with Hannah Glavor today and excited to hear more about your life and what you do. My name is Gabe Kolstad, and I'm from Westside Community Church, and it's been a minute since I've been on one of these podcasts. Excited to be here. How you doing, Ashwa?
Good, man. And you made the trek. You went across the river.
I did, yeah.
And like through the woods and
totally.
through the towns to come to the East Side studio.
I'm here.
We're glad to have you.
Good, thank you. We're diving into a series on worship, and so excited, Hannah, to have you with us because we know you've got a lot to say about that. And would love to just first, though, get to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself, your family, your life, your ministry, and all that.
Yeah, I moved to Portland in 2007 to go to school. I went to Multnomah University.
Okay.
And right after that, I jumped on staff at a church, and I was there for 11 years. And was ultimately one of the worship and arts pastors on staff there. And I served throughout the city simultaneously to doing ministry in the city. I was also starting a music career, kind of like alongside it. So I've also been like a touring recording artist as well that whole time. And before that, I grew up with my dad as a worship pastor at the church that I grew up in. And I swore I'd never do the same thing. I was like, no, that's his thing. It's not my thing. And doors just kept opening up and I stepped through them kind of reluctantly. And I feel like it's what I was supposed to be doing.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm a little curious. I know we're not going to dive deep into this, but just to hear, like, you were touring while leading worship at churches. And like, how did you manage the time balance and all of that?
Well, it was a little too much.
Okay.
When I first started on staff, I was not working full time, and I had this space, especially if shows are happening in the evenings.
Yeah.
And you start locally. You just like after work,
time.
you go play your set, and you just are back by midnight, and then you go to work the next morning, which was a little wild for the lack of sleep that occurred as a result of it. But it just kept happening, and the opportunities, you just kind of made space for it. And I was very excited about it and very passionate about it. So I just made space for the art that I loved doing. When I started full-time on staff in ministry, I was able to do it less frequently. And yeah, it's a little bit impossible to kind of spread yourself that thin.
Too thin, yeah.
Yeah. And so I would do it a little bit more sporadically. But
That's cool.
Now it's a bit more of my full-time thing.
Okay. Yeah. What about like your musical influences and all of that?
My dad so he didn't grow up in the church. He went to a Presbyterian church and didn't like find Christ found him later in life.
Spoken like a good Presbyterian.
I know.
Yeah. That's great.
Through Young Life, he someone had a friend in Young Life and then got involved when he was in college. And then I grew up with going to church and very used to that, but he grew up playing in bands, and he was in a bunch of like surf rock bands in California. And so I grew up listening to a lot of oldies and surf rock stuff in Motown. Wow. And so the beginning of my musical influence kind of started in that world with a lot of like classic tones, a lot of harmonies, like kind of classic rock from especially like the 60s. And then once I moved out to Portland from there, I got involved like in the indie folk scene. And so you bring in like the Lumineers and Decemberists and Fleet Foxes and Feist. And I started my musical voice kind of discovering that from all of those mushed into one, and then kind of kept expanding it from there to kind of like the rock that I listened to in high school, and then bringing in folky harmonies. And Yeah. So it's got a lot of shapes, but I swear I am one person.
I was going to say, have you coined a term that describes your musical style?
I would say I had different eras. So like when I first started, it was like very folky, singer-songwritery. And now I'm indie rock.
Okay.
Indie rock. I can say that.
All right. Okay, cool. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. So there was a Willamette Weekly article that I read to prep for this, and there was a line I want to read from that just really struck me. You said, I made perfectly fine music before, but I really feel like I'm saying something as if it's the last thing I could say for the first time. And the article was about your brain tumor and how that was a radical just both event and shift in your life. What is, in those eras, what's the difference, the pre going through that and then after that? And what does that mean to say things like it's the last thing that you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, there's several layers to that. I think it's like when you start as a young creative, you write the best that you can at the time. And I wrote pretty hesitantly. I didn't know that I could kind of claim being a musical artist as something that I felt comfortable saying. I was always a musician, but being an artist felt like too out there. I felt very comfortable doing visual arts. I was a painter and a drawer. Yeah, that's right.
That's how I would say it.
A drawer.
I like that.
I think I just sounds wrong.
Drawist.
A drawist. I was a drawist and a very talented drawist. And I was like going, I can do this, but a musician? No. Like, that's not something I do. I felt more comfortable kind of blending into the background. And I think I wrote music like I was trying to blend into the background and just make sure everything was a bit safe. And I loved what I was doing. I meant it. I was being influenced by some artists that I saw kind of recreating hymns around me, like King's Kaleidoscope, Page CXVI, my buddy Aaron Strumpel. At the time, in like around 2007 to like 10, they were taking old hymns and they were reinventing it. And since I was like a Bible theology nerd, obviously I really loved diving into historical hymns that were repurposed for a modern context. And I couldn't sing and lead worship like Brooke Fraser or Bethel or any of these artists. But I was being inspired by these people taking something that sounded one way to one particular group of people and were reinventing it to their abilities and their context. And that changed the way that I was rearranging music in general, cover songs, worship songs for like chapel or for church, and then ultimately writing my own stuff. And so I was like, I can't do this, but what can I do based off of my limits, but also my imagination? And I was surprised to see what I could find. And from that, I kept taking more steps forward. I started really timid, and then I just kind of kept taking more and more steps forward, surprised that I was able to create stuff that I didn't know that I had the ability to, because I was basing it around an understanding of my limitations at the time. I was like, well, I'm not this because I can only do this, versus dreaming a bit bigger. And so I also wrote within the context of, I was just a like kind of coffee shop songwriter. I was just writing kind of simple melodies and songs, and they were pure and sweet, but they were kind of like for the people that in the audience. And in hindsight, I almost think it as like pastoral, where I'm on Sunday context as like I'm leading worship in a congregation of people with a purpose. I'm looking into the eyes of the people around me and I'm leading them towards a specific thing. And I was starting to write my music kind of with the same intent of like, well, I don't know what you're going through and I don't know what you're going through. What's something that's true that we can all say together? So I wrote, they were a bit bland. I think I wrote some bland songs because I just wanted them to be safe. And I didn't want too much of myself because I wanted to be a responsible worship leader and then also a responsible artist that didn't shake things up too much because I wanted everybody to be able to listen to these songs. And so kind of after both the pandemic and also almost dying from a brain tumor, I was like, there's a lot I didn't say. There's a lot of things I wish that I said. There's a lot of things that I wish that I did different in the ways that I pastor to people. And it's not like extreme, this is my time to shine. I'm going to demand this. It's more of, there was so much of myself that I missed out on because I thought I was supposed to be shoved down and quieted. And so I started accidentally creating out of that. I didn't look to create an album or write songs going like, I'm going to say something. I just kind of was like, this might be the only time I get to say it. And I started writing different and completely different sounds came out of me. Stuff that I would almost reserve for like journal entries about just me being honest, even being honest with myself about how to process something, started coming out in lyrics in my songs. And I think for the better. And they're also equally relatable. I'm not saying anything extreme. It's just more of I think I feel the gravity and weight of life and last opportunities differently, kind of in light of the last 7 years of my life. And I don't want to miss being present. I think it's a very important thing to do.
So suffering and facing death gave you more courage. You feel like you kind of found that prophetic voice or that ability to be like, this is what needs to be said, and I'm not going to just let it go.
Yeah, I would say, because I don't know how brave I am, I couldn't keep it in. Like, I don't know that it was like intentional courage of like, I believe that I can, because I think I've not believed in myself so many different steps along the way. But it was like, there's something in me that like has to get it out. Something that I was like in my woven being. It's like, it's in my mind that I meant to say this and I never did. And it's just, it's just coming out of me. Almost like it's just bubbling over, but like in a positive way, in like a lovely way. And
so you got me so curious. Like, what are some of these things that you would never have said before, but that you wish you would have said, and then now you're saying?
You can use my visual art alone. Like if you just like, there's no music and you just look at the album covers that I've done in the last couple of years, you can see this. There's sincerity, true sincerity in all of it, like consistent across. I've been consistent in that. But I'm taking bolder visual steps with colors, with like images that just evoke something differently versus something that's safe and universal. Because I'm not suppressing myself and my joy and my creativity. I thought I had to. I remember one of the first office that I had when I was working on staff at a church, I put up like the weirdest art, and I was just like, it was goofy and it was very me. And I remember it wasn't that weird, but I remember that there was enough comments of people who didn't get it that I took it all down because I was like going, I am too much. My uniqueness, my creativity, my unique eye for things are too much. Who do you want me to be? Because apparently who I am is offensive in some way, or maybe it's just like there's like an air of disgust or concern when it was like, the thing that made people weirded out is I took an old atlas and I made a collage on one of the walls and I filled it up and it was very abstract. And over all of the major cities, I just put like neon crosses over all of it. Just like very like graphic, visually, very fun. And I remember people like, this is very weird. And I was like, in hindsight, I was like, that wasn't weird at all. It was just fun and creative. And it just was not like what was expected. And I just didn't, I was afraid to ruffle feathers then. And I didn't need to. Yeah.
So I so love that because I don't know if it's just me, but if am I flipping through the stations on the radio and I come up on one of these Christian music stations, like so much of CCM just sounds the same. Like you can even be like, don't give me the lyrics, just give me the chord progressions and the whatever, the guitar licks and all that. And I'm like, oh, that's Christian. I can tell by the what are the riffs or whatever, right? So like finding your own voice and standing out. Has there been any like, have you had to pay for that? Have there been any regrets or at least any counting of the cost of that? Or has it just all been a blessing?
I don't know, a blessing. I remember when I was in undergrad, I would say that the bent towards like, I can only do what I'm given with what I can with what I'm given. And this is how I'm leading. And I'm not doing it in retaliation. I'm doing it faithfully and honestly. And I can't help that I'm all these things that a lot of religious spaces did not like. I was young, unmarried, and a girl. And yet I was functionally still pastoring people. And they're like, we're uncomfortable, but we still feel God's doing something, but we don't know what to do. But
you're really good. You're better than all these other people. And
they didn't know what to do with it. And I remember like, that's when it started. And I'm like going, I'm not trying to prove that I can or should do these things. I'm saying it's happening. So I'm going to put myself in seminary so I'm better equipped for the thing that I am accidentally doing and that you're telling me I can't do, but it is happening. And I thought it was sinful, but now I'm watching it happen. And I'm just saying yes. And I'm walking through the doors. Like that's all that's happening. I would say in those eras, there was like pushback and harsh words said. But I, like, to this day, I don't regret any of that. Like, I think it was hard and it was isolating. And I had to deal with the comments. I had to process them. And also, when I was younger, try to manage my conservative theology. I was like going, am I a heretic? Am I sinning? Am I like, what am I doing showing up to these spaces? I would tell them I didn't want to. They're like going, we need you to lead for this thing. And I was like going, I don't want to. I am a girl. I don't want to be doing this in these spaces like this. Is that okay that I'm leading a band of all boys? And I was young and I was afraid of just turning tables. I was like, I don't want to make an issue. I'm not trying to spin people out. But I wouldn't say I regret it. I just kept showing up. Like I would get these invitations or opportunities, and I don't think with high expectations on the people inviting me. And I grew into someone I didn't expect. I wouldn't say it was me that grew me. Yeah.
I think that's really cool because if we're talking about worship and you're talking about your journey toward realizing who God made you to be and that expression of loving him back and doing that publicly, that is what worship is, right? So it's neat to be able to see that as an expression of you in that journey as a worship leader, experiencing what it means to be worshiping your Creator as your life unfolds. That's really cool.
Yeah,
it's a neat story.
I think it changed the game for me of like, if I doubted, I decided for myself who I couldn't be, and yet God did something with me that I didn't expect. How much more can that story be true in the people's lives around me? In the ways that we decide that people are one thing or another, or can't do this or can't do another. I don't think we're leaving space for what God can do by kind of almost naming a curse on other people, going like, you are never this. Versus going like, God is in control. God has you. I have an open mind to what God can do through you. What ways can we just support you to be the best Holy Spirit listener and obeyer of God that you can be without assuming who you are and who you aren't? It changed the way that I interact with everybody around me. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. I'm really curious about how you have navigated like what could be two worlds, but it seems like you really brought them together. Music inside the church, music outside the church. And your thing about pastoring people in coffee shops is really cool because I'm a big believer that ministry is not supposed to be, behind a paywall or behind a wall, a physical wall, but that somehow our goal should always be about integrating our regular life with the gospel. And I think a lot of people feel that way, but it's hard in that kind of context. So, I mean, was there ever anything in you that thought this is weird having this be in two worlds, the same heart?
I get this question often because they're like going, is it okay that you are leading worship on Sunday, but on Saturday night you sang in a club or a bar? So there was a lot of, I remember that being like the hot thing back in the day. For me, and this is different for everybody. Everybody that's maybe both in a pastoral position on a Sunday morning and then also creative in another space, whether it be a musician on a stage or elsewhere. If you use just music as an example, I have a friend that's in an awesome band that does really well. And they sings about anything. They kind of sound kind of Beatlesy. They sing about girls. They sing about whatever. And it's just fun, entertaining music about nothing in particular. And then he's also a pastor on Sunday morning. And he navigates that perfectly fine. He's not singing anything weird or off base. It's just, one is entertainment and one is worship. And there's worship throughout, but it's just two very different worlds. For me, the way that I approached it, I wanted to have the same character and the same presence and the same message kind of across. The way that maybe I physically carry myself is different on a Sunday morning versus a Saturday night. It's like I do this every Saturday night. I don't like that often. Every Saturday night. But it's like the heart behind it's the same. And I almost use it as an exploration of like, what can I say that's the same to all of us with the context of different cultures in play? I am shepherding actively and relationally a certain group of people in front of me. But I don't know necessarily the people in front of me in a place where they're coming for entertainment. And I don't want it to be a bait and switch. So like what can I say to them that is not going to be triggering in a weird way, that's not going to be using or abusing them, but is true and offers a message that is true in some way to everybody. And I use a lot of my own life and my own story as kind of like that conversation point. And I think that's the best way to connect with people in general about that kind of stuff. And so I am bringing forth my vulnerability, me processing my own journey and my hardships, of which I have many and of which other people have many. And I think that's a very sincere and genuine connection point. I'm not trying to trick them into anything. I've faced death. I've wanted to die. I've been depressed. I have been hurt and abused. I have things that are very relatable in my story, and I can still look in the person across from me and express that there is hope. And I can in my personal life point to a name where that hope is sourced from, but I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to just bomb that on somebody when it's like the first thing that they just need to hear is that there is hope and that it is worth another day and that they are worthy and that they are beautiful and that there is it's the small steps towards you think of maybe a baseball coach or a conversation with a parent or a sibling or a bully. A singular phrase could make or break the rest of your life. One moment that maybe meant nothing to them could either change your life for the better or for the worse. What if that was in an earworm in a song that's saying you're not alone. There is hope. Hold on. Tiny little things that are in there that if they're stepping foot into a church, I think they can responsibly say it's I'm expecting to hear some kind of Jesus gospel something. Right. If I'm stepping into a club, if that happens to me, I might get mad. I don't want to do that to them, but it's I can look them in the eye and mean it without any bait and switch because I mean it for me and I mean it for them too. That I'm going, hold on, there is hope. Talk to me. Here's my story. Here's how I almost died, and somehow I made it. Welcome to hear the rest of my story. And I make it very clear across platforms, bits of my story, but I want it to be relational and invitational. I have family and friends that don't ever want us to step foot in the church, and I want them to be able to stomach a show on a Saturday night because they might never make it to Sunday. And what can they hear and who do they know me as that can be consistent in their lives? Because I do think that it's a relational long haul versus a Jesus bomb in one moment. I think it's who we are consistently in each other's lives, pastoring for the long haul. And it's long and it's a roller coaster and it's not always pretty. but it's consistent. So I'm trying it. I'm trying that out.
That's great.
Yeah.
Love that.
Do you see a movement of that, of others, of musicians and creatives and songwriters who are also Christian, who take their art into secular spaces to create that kind of shared place of hospitality and like shared experience, as opposed to the truth bombing or, hey, I just create for this Christian market because that's what sells or that's what my audience wants?
I've seen many attempts. I think there's few who do it well without making it weird or awkward, or it becomes like Christian self-serving secretly in the end. I see like one of my favorite examples, and I know he's aiming more towards like worshipy stuff now, but one of my favorite examples, and it was definitely someone that inspired me early on, someone like Josh Garrels. When I first met him, I met him in venue spaces. I know he became a pastor, has been a pastor, and is working on like worship albums now. But the way that he sincerely engaged with audience members and told his story and other stories as just like a shepherd of sound and space, and just took opportunities of every moment. And just who he is consistent from his storytelling on the stage to who he is in his own home and kind of beyond. I wanted to be like that. I toured with an artist named Liz Weiss for a number of years, and she accidentally became bigger than she intended and mostly was playing in secular spaces. And people would be crying while we were playing our shows, going like, this feels like Sunday morning. And we were able to like sing songs of hope over groups of strangers, rooms full of strangers. She obviously has more stories than me because that was a moment in time and I'm not in the band anymore. It does happen. It's rare for it to not be weird. I think people who are like intentionally seeking it don't always get the opportunity. So it's like my posture is always like, I'm not going to try too hard. I'm just going to consistently be myself and show up honestly and relationally and be consistent everywhere I go, no matter what job that I have. And hopefully that character shines through and that hope shines through. Because I mean it. I really do mean it. I'd say there's people that do it and it's weird. I worked as a venue manager for years. I'm in a couple different concert venues in town. And anytime there was I would know they were a Christian artist, but it's like the staff would find out like while they're there, they're like, this sounds kind of Christian. I'm like, I've known. I knew they were. And it would always be kind of icky till a lot of the staff members are like, this is awful. This is like, and people are now worshiping here, and they felt almost betrayed and unsafe. And I never wanted spaces that I was playing music in to be that. I was like, I never wanted to be a trick. I don't want to trick the staff into suddenly accepting Jesus. I want to get to know the staff. And I was like, what I got to do after that was get to know staff members for a number of years. And I'm like, well, like, actually, I am a Christian too. Yeah, but you're not like that. And I was like, I'm not. Like, well, let's talk about that. Like, there's just a different consistency over longevity of relationship versus like truth bombing people. Nobody
that
needs
seems
that.
like a real key, doesn't it? And it's like the intention going into those interactions is if you're not in it for the long haul, your activity just comes out totally different, right? But if you think about, well, the next time I talk to them, I want to still have a good rapport, then your approach suddenly changes, it seems like.
Yeah, and I mean, I have opinions on like what's behind it. Like what I studied Bible and theology and intercultural studies, and so I thought I was going to get into missions, so I did big, deep studies on like Billy Graham, Palau, like big festivals. My parents were missionaries in Mexico. And a lot of the ministries that they were involved in was like, if we bring a lot of people and we gather people in kind of festival styles and we bring immediate resources, like we'll do some, it's almost like, it's like Santa Claus. It's like, we brought you the Jesus Santa Claus. He'll give you what you want, and then we'll leave. That happens a lot of times. That's not saying that happens every time. But I think with almost that mentality of like, how can I responsibly enter into a space that's not mine with people that I won't know later and still tell them something that's true, and respect that culture, whether it's the music culture or I'm going into a village in Uganda. Like, how do I show up honoring who they are when I'm not going to be spending the next 20 years of my life building a relationship with them, and leave them truth with responsibility? And how do I equip leaders? Like, that's what you do when you're doing like overseas missions.
Yeah.
Is you're equipping leaders, but it's like, it's not necessarily happening in like a venue. But then it's like, is it just a concert for the Christians? Is it a concert for conversion? Like, is it evangelism? Like, what's kind of the purpose? I also find myself moving back to like the worship circuits. I've been leading in a lot of different churches, many different denominations, conferences, retreats, since I stepped out of full-time ministry. And I approach it kind of with the same cultural respect. I may never come to the same theological conclusions as a guest in these spaces, but what do we believe that's true? Like, it's actually my responsibility to get to know these churches. And what sermon series are you going through? What are the songs? That's like a language of a people. Like, what makes you you? Only hymns? Great. You actually took some of the pronouns because you're not comfortable in Be Thou My Vision, I Thy True Son, because there's women too. All right, that's fine. Let's change a lyric. But I want to get to know each of these spaces as a guest, not assuming that I am bringing the best. I want to get to know them as I continue being guests in these spaces, for the building and equipping of those people as they are and where they are in that moment. Here you go.
I knew there was a missionary in there. I could hear it the whole time. Yeah.
Yes. So, it is so obvious that you have a love for specific people and friends who you're desiring to know, for them to know God. I would say often, like for pastors, right, in churches, they think about worship. Some will think of it more as, this is for us here. Others will have a very missional view of worship, that it's about hospitality and welcoming in others. I'd be curious, how do you see worship functioning missionally, both in the gathering, but then also how do you mobilize creatives and artists and musicians within your church to reach this community of creatives in this very like weird, artsy city of Portland?
I mean, some of this comes from my belief and conviction of just the church in general and some kinks within it that make it unhealthy. I think we're always supposed to be moving forward into our immediate community and then beyond and beyond, and equipping people as we go. I think it's very easy for churches to get comfortable and complacent in a lot of different ways, whether it's services that are offered, whether for like childcare or like marriage counseling, maybe it's food for families in need, but even just the comfort of a Sunday service. You just want to feel comfortable and you want to be comforted. You want to hear your familiar songs. You want to hear them in the style that you want. You want the bread and the wine, but you actually don't like wine, so you want your grape juice. Everybody comes with some sort of expectation, even if we're very open-minded. And I don't think we're ever supposed to get that comfortable. And a lot of me stepping out of kind of like the upward trajectory of ministry path that I was in was that, like, kind of based on that conviction. I'm like going, I'm getting too elevated in these spaces, and it's irresponsible for the congregation because they're going to keep following me and they're going to keep wanting to be elevated in these spaces or want more ministry preferences, or want more songs that sound this way. They don't like it when this person leads. They like it when this person leads. This one says it's too quiet. This one says it's too loud. And I think
just include earplugs in a little basket at the door. That solves the problem.
We actually do that. So.
Yeah.
It can happen. I think it's symptomatic of a larger problem with modern evangelical church as a whole. Which is not a short conversation, and it's more than this. But as like a worship leader entering into those spaces, I'm very conscious of it, and I don't want to like let people just get away with it. I'm like, a lot of times I'll get brought in to like sing a song a certain way, and they like it because I can sing really big, or I can sing like this person, or they want the musical swells. And I remember having conversations with like how you can use musical swells to like better guide people in the spirit. And I think there's something naturally that occurs within music, that we are emotional beings and we respond emotionally to things like music and visuals and sounds and beats and rhythms. And it is intangible. You can't even explain it all the way. It's something biological in us. I think it's beautiful when you can shape moments and curate things responsibly and beautifully. As a creative, I value that. But I do think a lot of times it toes the line of manipulation, and it can easily get to someone's head when they're constantly able to get someone into that emotional space, or that becomes the requirement. And I think we get addicted to emotional relationships with Jesus. And as a person that's been through much suffering, emotional Jesus doesn't show up for you when you're dying of a brain tumor, and when you're not being healed of it, and when your dad gets dementia and has a stroke, and when like emotional Jesus doesn't fix all of those things. Like, what does it look like when you don't get your way, when you're experiencing real hardship, and feeling good is not the answer. It's actually the grieving and the community surrounding you in those spaces that's the answer. So as a creative, I like kind of like hold that responsibly. Like, what do I need to pastor people through in moments of grieving, of hard times, of joy and celebration? I think this is probably not where you thought the conversation was going.
I'm digging it. So keep going. It's awesome.
I think we need to be training and equipping more worship leaders to be pastors and shepherds versus just good musicians. I think that's an easy win for me. I think there's so much focus on the sound and the quality and the lights and the production. And as a creative that works professionally in these spaces, obviously that matters to me. I value that, but that's not what Sunday's about. And I think we don't even know the ways that we're addicted to those things. And so rather than equipping the best musicians and visual artists to be doing what we think is best for the kingdom, I think we're furthering our addiction on Sundays and throughout the week. I am very interested in what does it look like to be equipping more pastors to be shepherds, actual shepherds that are doing the long haul dirty work in their communities and outside of their communities, biblically equipped, not just musically. That was like, the music should be the afterthought. The art should be the afterthought. That should just be the bonus of what's already happening. And I think you could be mobilizing artists by believing that what they're bringing is just as valuable as someone that's teaching on a Sunday morning. I went into seminary thinking that I was not qualified in all these different ways. I'm like, I don't think like a scholar. I don't speak like a scholar. I don't preach like this. I am a woman. I am unmarried. I'm all these things that are not enough for the spaces that I'm inhabiting, yet I was in them. And if people just believed that like I, as I was enough, I think I would have so much more confidence in these spaces, and there'd be so many more opportunities for young humans like myself to show up in ways that we did not expect. Because if we truly believe that God equips all of us and that the Holy Spirit is available for all of us, and that we can listen and obey, all of us, in our varying occupations and in varying moments throughout our lives, why not equip everybody to believe in that possibility that they can take a small step of faith as an artist, as a doctor, as a whatever, as a grocer, as a child who doesn't know who they are yet, like that they don't need to wait until they've got it figured out. They don't need to wait till they are married. They don't need to wait till they're having kids. I kept waiting for the next thing, and none of those things happened. And yet God was still doing something in me, and I was fighting the whole way. I didn't have to fight if I was being told something different, and people went like, yeah, I mean, God's just doing something in you. Let's just pray together and like keep seeking him. You should just keep seeking him. If we're equipping people that way, it kind of doesn't matter the occupation. I'm passionate about creatives. I am a creative. I obviously have a bent toward it. But I also just believe in personhood and the people that are kind of on the margins that we don't assume are going to be bringing much of anything. And those are who I want to be looking towards. Those, like the people on the margins, whether it's socioeconomic margins, racial margin, gender margins, like all of it. It's like, where are the places that we're not looking? Because it's easy to look to the people on stage, the people who are doing well, the people that sound even audibly like they're doing well. Where are the places that you don't expect to see the Spirit of God moving? Because it's already happening, whether you're looking there or not. I was a worship and arts pastor, and we mobilized a lot of artists, and it's because so many were collecting. They were just showing up. So we're like, all right, so what do we do with you? So we plugged them into some really cool like justice initiatives. There's a lot of practical things that you can do with creatives, musicians, digital artists, painters, dancers, poets, and you can plug it into a service, and it's phenomenal. There's amazing stuff. But I think a lot of times we look for what can we do to mobilize them in safe spaces that we've deemed safe, like the church. And I want to explore the unsafe spaces, because our world and our life is not just the walls of what or maintaining to be hubs of truth. Our reality is so much broader. So like, who are we with our neighbor, and who are we? Like, that's what I want to equip people for. I want more people to be equipped as artists, creatives, young people, women, like all of us, elderly. Like, what are we doing with them once they're too old to preach and their kids are moved out? I want them to be just as valuable as they were when they had all these things that we were valuing the whole time. Yeah.
Man, she's speaking our language, Gabe. This is what we're about at Multiply PDX.
Absolutely. And also, once in a while we have one of these where I'm just like feeling like, we just went to school a little bit, and I love it. It's really great. Also, you just said that old people whose kids have moved out, and my youngest just moved out. So thank you for that. No, I'm just kidding.
God still has a plan for you, Gabe.
God still has a plan for my life. I know. I'm not too old. Maybe I am too old, but I'm still useful.
Well, that's not so that I'm
just kidding you.
I found myself like always. I think we even did this in Gary's class when we met, which not everybody knows, I guess. We did a whole thing on, what was it? We read a book, and it was on like, what is healthy sexuality in the church? What does that look like? And I wrote a whole separate thing going like, this is biblical understanding. This is what this person's arguing. This is what Gary wants to hear. And then I did a whole side thing going like, none of this matters if we're looking for are like the milestones in our life that we have deemed as like imaging God best, because I've achieved none of those, and neither did Jesus. Like, he didn't get married and did not have kids, and was like, he was all of these things. It's like being fruit and multiplicity is not just confined to the marital act and like building a family that way. I have to imagine that like a young human who is unmarried and probably like a teenager, God can be using them in massive ways, in the same way that a widow, or maybe someone that can never have kids, or maybe like there's like, I think we limit to these understandings of like, God can only use us in this way, and he uses us the best in these ways. And I was like, I think it's limited. I think God can do so much more. And I think we need to broaden our horizons and our imagination of what that can look like. And I found out by accident, because I just didn't fit the molds in all of these places that I like knew I didn't fit, but I just kept showing up into kind of faithfully with no intention of ascension. I was like, I wasn't trying to do anything or prove a point. I just was in these spaces. And I'm like, well, I don't belong. I'm not going to do anything here. And things just kept happening. And if change could happen in me, how much more change can happen if people were actually believing in them and empowering them in these spaces. There you go.
Yeah, it's powerful. I think that's a good mic drop.
Absolutely.
Moment right there.
Yeah. I know people would love to find out more about your music and how they can connect with you. So how's that?
Well, I play shows locally. So if you're in the Portland, Seattle, Eugene area, I play shows locally all the time. And I always update social media for that. It's just my name, Hannah the Glavor on Instagram, or hannahglavor.com. I think that's my website. I should know this. But it's spelled like flavor. So it's Glavor. I got shows coming up in December. Yeah. I have albums online. You can stream it anywhere. If you rather listen in your car or in your home, I have CDs and vinyls.
Didn't you have a video that won some awards recently?
Yes. And it's a weird one too. So you can have like going like...
It's really good.
It's such a weird video.
I'll agree with you on the weirdness too.
I thought I made it almost like as a joke. And I was just feeling like silly and weird. I made a song kind of like half put it together with a friend, and it was a song that I'd written off. It was like 10 years old, and I was like, I'm just going to make this for fun. And my friend thought it was really fun. He's like, well, I just want to make a video for fun. I was like, let's be weird. And I was like, let's like be like the symbolic of like flower trying to bloom in a place that's not working out, and then it finds its home outside of that place. So it's like this symbolic. It's like, let's start over again and find places where we can grow after things weren't growing. So there's a lot of symbolism, like relatable symbolism in there. And I literally dressed up like a flower with a big flower mask. And it won Best Music Video of the year last year. And the whole time we were like going, this was a massive accident. But the learning curve for me was like, it was enough. Like my story was enough. Even my weird take on it was enough. And so like, I didn't need to try as hard. I mean, not everybody could put on a flower mask and win a video. It was a definite accident for me. But it honors like the goofiness. And I think there's something, I've always like been a little bit embarrassed that I'm like silly and weird like that. And especially in Christian spaces, because I don't think we have a lot of space for it unless you're a kid. And I just never lost it. And it just, I'm like, no, it's fun. Like I should just keep leaning into fun stuff that makes me happy, because I think I'm made for that. Henry Nouwen, like Life of the Beloved, like we're created to love things and be passionate about things for a reason. And there's so much value to be had there. It's in you for a reason. You are like this for a reason. You don't need to be embarrassed about it. So yeah, I did win that. You can find that on YouTube if you dare.
What's it called?
That song's called Start Over Again.
Start Over Again.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having
Awesome
me.
to hear from you. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.